two of the most influential names in the Black Church, Bishop T.D. Jakes and Bishop Paul Morton, have suddenly found themselves right in the middle of a storm. What once started as hushed whispers behind closed doors has now burst into the open, sending shockwaves across pulpits and pews all over the nation. Did T.D. Jakes really confront Paul Morton? If that's true, what exactly ignited this clash between two giants of faith? Stick with me, because the details surrounding this confrontation are bound to leave you stunned, and the truth may not be at all what you expect. When you hear the names Bishop T.D. Jakes and Bishop Paul Morton, what's the first thought that comes to mind? For most, these men symbolize authority, power, and influence within the Christian community. Bishop Jakes, the visionary leader behind the Potter's House in Dallas, has built one of the largest and most influential ministries on the planet. Bishop Morton, in contrast, is the founder of the Full Gospel Baptist Church Fellowship, a movement that dramatically reshaped how many Black churches worship and function. Both are spiritual titans admired, respected, and in many ways considered untouchable. But what happens when two giants finally collide? What happens when tensions that have been quietly simmering for years boil over into the open? That's precisely what has unfolded recently, and the fallout is leaving many people questioning not just the relationship between these two leaders, but also the direction of the Black church itself. For years, there have been murmurs, subtle frictions, quiet disagreements, and clashing visions of the church's future. Jakes and Morton were never open enemies, but insiders claim they've never truly seen eye to eye either. And now, according to several reports, Bishop Jakes has directly confronted Bishop Morton. The question is, why now? What could have possibly pushed T.D. Jakes, a man known for diplomacy, wisdom, and restraint, to step forward and address Paul Morton in such a bold, public way? Was it a matter of doctrine? Was it about influence and power? Or could it have been something deeply personal? In today's video, we're going to break down exactly what unfolded between Bishop T.D. Jakes and Bishop Paul Morton. We'll look back at the history of their connection, the roots of their differences, and the startling details of this confrontation that have left congregations nationwide in disbelief. And trust me, you'll want to stay until the very end, because what we're about to uncover could forever change the way you see these two leaders. So buckle up, because this isn't just harmless church chatter. This is about power, legacy, and a battle that could alter the future of two massive ministries. And believe me, it only grows more dramatic from here. To really grasp this confrontation between Bishop T.D. Jakes and Bishop Paul Morton, we first need to revisit the long and complex history shared by these two men. A history marked by deep mutual respect, occasional disagreements, and an undeniable influence over millions of believers. Bishop T.D. Jakes first rose to national prominence in the 1990s with his fiery preaching and best-selling books. His ministry, the Potter's House in Dallas, has evolved into a global institution with tens of thousands of members, millions of online viewers, and an international reputation for excellence. Jakes is far more than a pastor. He's a cultural icon, bridging the gap between ministry, entertainment, and business leadership. He has advised presidents, guided celebrities, and built a brand that's just as much about empowerment as it is about the gospel. Meanwhile, Bishop Paul Morton has carved out his own legendary status. He rose to prominence as the leader of the Full Gospel Baptist Church Fellowship, a movement that in the 1990s broke away from traditional Baptist structures. Morton's vision was to welcome the gifts of the Spirit, infuse Baptist churches with Pentecostal fire, and craft a new style of worship that was at once orderly and free. This movement spread across the United States and beyond, impacting thousands of churches and reshaping modern worship as we recognize it today. Now, here's where it gets interesting. While both Jakes and Morton were building their respective empires, their paths frequently overlapped. They shared pulpits, spoke at the same conferences, and were often considered part of the same circle of Black church leadership. Yet, beneath the surface, subtle differences in their approach could be seen. Jakes has always leaned toward expansion, branding, and crossing cultural lines. He has spoken in massive arenas, collaborated with Hollywood producers, and positioned himself as a voice capable of inspiring people well outside church walls. Morton, while equally visionary, remained more focused on church reform and denominational leadership. He often emphasized spiritual accountability and the importance of drawing a firm line between the sacred and the secular. Over the years, these contrasts did not go unnoticed. Some quietly suggested Morton thought Jakes was leaning too far into Hollywood, too focused on image and influence. Others hinted that Jakes felt Morton was too traditional, too hesitant to adjust to changing times. And while neither man ever publicly criticized the other, those contrasts created a quiet tension that insiders say never fully disappeared. Still, there was also real admiration. Both men respected one another's achievements, and in public settings they were always cordial. Jakes once applauded Morton's leadership in bringing the Spirit more fully into Baptist churches, while Morton openly acknowledged Jakes' unique gift for reaching souls many pastors can never reach. But as is often the case with powerful leaders, respect does not always erase rivalry. As time passed and the church world shifted with social media scandals and cultural expectations changing rapidly, those subtle tensions only deepened. Supporters of Morton admired him for his integrity, tradition, and steady hand, while Jakes' followers celebrated his boldness, innovation, and ability to keep the church relevant in a fast-paced world. So when word spread that Bishop Jakes had directly confronted Bishop Morton, it didn't appear from thin air. It was the boiling point of decades-long differences, a clash of two distinct visions for what the Black church should represent. And while no one ever expected these two giants to collide publicly, in hindsight, maybe it was bound to happen. But here's the shocking twist. The confrontation wasn't just about leadership styles. According to those close to the matter, it was triggered by something deeper, something personal, an issue that pushed Jakes to speak out in a way he never had before. Now that we've set the stage and established who these two leaders are, let's dive into what actually drove Bishop T.D. Jakes to confront Bishop Paul Morton. Because one thing is clear, Jakes is not a man known for public clashes. He is careful, deliberate, and diplomatic with his words. For him to step forward and address Morton directly, something significant had to push him over that line. Insiders close to both camps say this confrontation wasn't just a spur-of-the-moment explosion. It was the outcome of years of subtle disagreements, quiet criticisms, and contrasting visions for the church world finally colliding at the wrong time. One of the earliest sparks came from remarks Paul Morton reportedly made about the direction the modern church was heading. Morton, known for his firm positions, suggested that today's mega ministries were straying too far into the realm of entertainment. He pointed out how some pastors seemed more focused on brand deals, celebrity connections, and media attention than on true biblical accountability. Although Morton never called Jakes by name, many people drew their own conclusions. After all, Jakes has collaborated with Oprah, Tyler Perry, and even Hollywood studios. To Morton's supporters, those words felt like a much-needed reality check. But to Jakes' circle, the comments sounded like a subtle jab at their leader. Yet, this wasn't the only source of friction. Another flashpoint surfaced around the question of leadership succession and influence. Before stepping down as the head of the Full Gospel Baptist Church Fellowship, Bishop Morton publicly warned against building ministries around the charisma of a single man. He emphasized the need to raise up future leaders, share authority, and make sure churches would survive beyond the life of their founder. Now contrast that with Bishop Jakes, who continues to stand at the center of the Potter's House, a ministry deeply connected to his own name and brand. Once again, Morton never explicitly mentioned Jakes, but the implication was strong enough to spark conversations. Then came the issue of social justice and public witness. In recent years, Jakes has taken on a national role, speaking out on economic empowerment, meeting with politicians, and stepping into spaces many traditional pastors have avoided. Morton, in comparison, has kept his focus more firmly on the local church's responsibility within the community, with far less emphasis on political platforms. These different approaches created a quiet, yet undeniable tension between their camps of supporters. But what was it that finally pushed things past the point of no return? Reports suggest it all came to a head during a private gathering, a meeting of prominent church leaders where discussions turned heated. Those in the room claim Morton made comments that many interpreted as a direct criticism of pastors, more focused on being celebrities than shepherds. That was the moment when Bishop Jakes, who had stayed silent through similar remarks before, decided he had heard enough. He is said to have stood his ground, confronting Morton directly, defending not just his own ministry but also the belief that the church can remain spiritual while still engaging culture. Witnesses described the atmosphere as incredibly tense. This wasn't a casual disagreement between pastors, it was two towering figures of faith drawing the bold line in the sand. Morton reportedly doubled down on his conviction that the modern church is in danger of losing its soul to fame and fortune. Jakes, in turn, is said to have argued that cultural relevance does not diminish spiritual power and that sometimes, reaching the world requires stepping beyond the church's four walls. That face-to-face clash sent shockwaves, far beyond that private meeting. Word spread quickly, whispers grew into headlines, and before long, what was meant to be behind closed doors had turned into a very public spectacle. Church members, pastors, and even celebrities who follow both leaders began weighing in. Was Morton right to call out what he saw as dangerous trends? Or was Jakes justified in defending the importance of innovation and influence in the church of today? And here's the twist. This wasn't simply a matter of style or personal preference. Sources say the clash became so intense that long-established alliances between the two camps started to crumble. Friendships cooled and invitations to certain pulpits were quietly pulled back. In a world where appearances often carry everything, the fact that these rifts became visible was nothing short of shocking. But as fiery as things became, an even bigger question rose out of this confrontation. What does it mean for the future of the Black church when two of its most powerful voices are openly at odds? That's where the story takes an even more dramatic turn, because the ripple effects of this clash didn't remain confined to Jakes and Morton. It spread outward to congregations, ministries, and church movements all across the nation. When two giants collide, the very ground beneath them shakes, and that's exactly what unfolded after Bishop T.D. Jakes confronted Bishop Paul Morton. What could have stayed hidden as a private disagreement behind closed doors quickly became the subject of conversation across the entire church world. Once the story escaped those rooms, there was no putting it back in. Let's start with the congregations. Both leaders shepherd flocks that deeply admire, respect, and in many cases revere them. For Jakes' followers, many felt Morton's critiques were an unnecessary strike, almost like he was questioning the legitimacy of the Potter's house and the global platform Jakes has built. Soon, hashtags started trending, with supporters defending Jakes as a true visionary, one who carried the gospel into spaces where the traditional church had never reached. They argued that without leaders like Jakes breaking through barriers, the church would remain stuck in the past, speaking only to itself. Meanwhile, Morton's followers saw the confrontation as proof that their bishop had the boldness to say what others didn't dare to them. Morton wasn't tearing Jakes down, he was drawing the line, standing for purity in the pulpit, and reminding everyone that pastors are meant to be shepherds, not celebrities. In their eyes, Jakes' pushback didn't weaken Morton's stance, it only highlighted how uncomfortable truth can be when it threatens power. But the fallout went beyond congregations. Other pastors and church leaders began to carefully take sides. In the Black church, respect for elders runs deep, so few wanted to appear openly disrespectful. Yet the divide was unmistakable. Some leaned toward Jakes, praising his gift for carrying faith into mainstream spaces and pointing out that the gospel has always adapted to cultural shifts. Others leaned toward Morton, warning that in the rush to remain relevant, too many churches were trading holiness for headlines. And then the media got involved. Christian outlets splashed headlines like Clash of the Bishops, Jakes and Morton at odds, and is the megachurch model in trouble? Secular outlets, always eager to spotlight conflict within faith communities, picked it up too. Suddenly, this wasn't just church chatter anymore. It became a national conversation about the future of faith, leadership, and influence. What made the situation even more explosive was how it tapped into deeper frustrations simmering within the broader church. Many smaller pastors who often feel overshadowed by massive ministries saw Morton's remarks as validation. They echoed his words, insisting that celebrity pastors set impossible expectations and siphon resources away from local congregations. Meanwhile, pastors who looked to Jakes for inspiration pushed back, saying that innovation and global reach are necessary in an era where church attendance is dropping, and young people are turning away from traditional institutions. But maybe the most unexpected fallout revealed itself in the form of fractured relationships. For years, Jakes and Morton were often seen side by side at major services, conferences, and church events. Their joint appearances had come to represent unity and strength across the faith community. Yet after this confrontation, those invitations quietly stopped coming. Conferences that once proudly displayed both names on the same flyer suddenly featured only one. Behind the curtains, insiders whispered about friendships breaking down and allies being forced to pick sides. Partnerships that once strengthened the church were starting to unravel. Even gospel artists and celebrities tied to both men found themselves caught in uncomfortable positions. Do you take a stand for one, or stay silent? And if you remain quiet, do you risk looking weak? For many, silence seemed like the safest path, but that silence only created more speculation. And while the external drama was loud and public, the internal damage cut even deeper. Members within both leaders' congregations began to question not only the confrontation itself, but what it represented. Was the Black church heading into a new kind of civil war, one between tradition and innovation, between purity and popularity, between shepherds and celebrities? To make it even more tense, rumors started circulating about late-night phone calls, behind closed-doors meetings, and reconciliation attempts that either collapsed or were outright rejected. Some say close advisors had urged both bishops to tone things down before it went too far, but by that stage, it was already beyond repair. Once the story escaped into the public sphere, it grew a life of its own. And this is where it gets even more shocking. The fallout wasn't just personal for Jakes and Morton. It raised unsettling questions about the megachurch model itself. People began to ask, can entire ministries really survive when they revolve around a single man? What happens when that leader is gone or when his authority comes under fire? These were no longer abstract debates. They became urgent conversations happening in boardrooms, in pulpits, and during prayer meetings across the country. What started as a heated clash between two influential bishops had spiraled into something far greater, a defining moment for the church itself. But the most surprising turns in the story were still on the horizon. Because while some focused only on the fallout, others were already asking, could this confrontation actually reshape the future of church leadership in America? At first glance, the standoff between Bishop T.D. Jakes and Bishop Paul Morton might look like just another dispute between two powerful men of God. After all, clashes among leaders are nothing new, and many eventually fade into history. But what makes this moment so crucial is that it isn't just about personality or ego. It cuts deeper than church politics. It goes straight to the heart of what faith leadership means in the 21st century and why it matters, not only for the church but for society as a whole. Let's start with the generational gap. Bishop Paul Morton represents the older, more traditional style of church leadership. His message has always stressed holiness, humility, and the pastor's role as a spiritual caretaker above all else. For him, the pulpit is not a platform for fame, it is sacred ground where God's truth must be guarded at all costs. This vision resonates powerfully with older generations who grew up in churches where discipline, reverence, and order were the very foundation of faith. Bishop T.D. Jakes, by contrast, reflects the modern, media-savvy approach to spiritual leadership. His ministry has embraced television, film, massive conferences, and now digital platforms to reach people worldwide. He doesn't simply preach sermons, he creates experiences that feel larger than life, drawing thousands in person and millions online. To younger believers and even those outside traditional church walls, Jakes symbolizes accessibility, relevance, and a fearless approach to sharing the gospel. His influence extends beyond the pulpit, reaching into entertainment, politics, and even social justice debates. So when these two leaders collide, the clash is far more than personal. It represents the greater struggle between tradition and innovation. The question then becomes, what path should the church take as it moves forward? Do we cling tightly to the roots that have sustained believers for generations, or do we embrace modern tools and platforms to remain relevant in a culture that's constantly shifting? Now let's pull back and look at the broader cultural implications. In America, especially within the Black community, the church has always been more than a simple place of worship. It has stood as a safe refuge, a hub for social justice, and a space where identity and empowerment have been nurtured. So when leaders like Jakes and Morton collide, it sends shockwaves through the entire community, because their voices hold weight not just spiritually, but culturally as well. Their influence helps shape how people organize, how they respond to crises, and how they engage with issues like politics, economics, and racial justice. Think of it this way: when T.D. Jakes hosts massive gatherings such as When Thou Art Loosed or Megafest, they're not merely spiritual conferences, they function as economic powerhouses. And then there's the global dimension. Jakes' ministry stretches far beyond America. His sermons are broadcast internationally, His books translated into multiple languages, and his events attract attendees from across the world. This means his style of ministry sets a tone for churches everywhere. If the celebrity-driven model becomes the norm, congregations in Africa, Europe, and beyond may begin to mirror it. Morton's confrontation, therefore, isn't just directed at Jakes, it's a warning aimed at the global church itself. Be cautious not to lose your soul in chasing influence. At the same time, this clash forces us to wrestle with a deeper spiritual question. What does it truly mean to be called a shepherd? Is a shepherd defined by the size of his congregation, the scope of his platform, or the purity of his message? And this question isn't limited to Jakes or Morton. It speaks to every pastor, every minister, and every believer trying to live out their faith in a modern world overflowing with distractions, temptations, and opportunities. And here's the striking part: this confrontation mirrors the heart of a universal human struggle. Whether in the church, in business, or in daily life, people everywhere grapple with the balance between authenticity and achievement, between staying true to one's roots and adapting to the demands of the moment, between humility and ambition. That's why this particular clash resonates well beyond the pulpit. At its core, it reflects the timeless tension between staying grounded and reaching higher. But what makes it even more compelling is that it's sparking new conversations among younger believers and pastors who are watching carefully. Many millennials and Gen Z Christians are weary of both extremes. They don't want a church that feels stale and outdated, yet they're equally skeptical of a church that looks more like Hollywood than holy ground. They're beginning to ask fresh questions, seeking alternative models, and pressing for a balance that respects tradition while embracing innovation. In many respects, the Jakes-Morton dispute has become a catalyst for this younger generation, prompting them to reimagine what church should look like in their time. And still, for all these broader implications, one crucial question remains unanswered. Can the church move forward in unity, or will this conflict carve out deeper divisions that linger for years to come? Because let there be no doubt, the way this confrontation is resolved will set a precedent. If reconciliation happens, it could become a model of humility, maturity, and genuine leadership. But if the rift only grows wider, it may mark a lasting fracture in how church leaders relate to one another and to their communities. So, while on the surface it may seem like just another internal church dispute, this moment carries significance far beyond the individuals at the center. It stands as a test of leadership, a reflection of cultural shifts, and a mirror being held up to the church itself. The world is watching, and whatever comes next could alter the path of faith leadership for generations to come.